Okay, everyone, this is my spoiler review of X-Men, the animated series, Season 1, Episode 9, The Cure. This originally came out February 20th, 1993. Before I jump into my review, please hit that subscribe button. This is a new channel. It's going to be everything X-Men, so if you love X-Men, make sure to hit the subscribe button. I'm coming out with a video every single day. Now, this was another fun episode like the last episode with so many appearances of great characters coming for the first time, but also really good character insight into the character of Rogue. Now, when I'm talking about exciting character appearances, that first one comes by Angel, and it is Warren Worthington III, and he's with his gal by the fire, and we learn that he had Godfrey Adler, the expert on genetics, sent to Scotland. So that was set up later in the episode why Angel will go there looking for him to warn him. And also, we find out that Angel doesn't like being a mutant. He's like Rogue in that sense and wants to be cured. I love when Cable shows up to the cabin and he's like, Adler? And Angel says back, I'm Warren Worthington the Third. Like, clearly states he's the third. I thought that was really funny. And Cable shoots him into the snow. So we see he comes out as an angel and we get a snow angel. And then when the girlfriend is running looking for him, I love that we just see Cable's just standing hiding behind the open door. It's just funny things you see in 90s animation. And we'll see that Cable and Angel have a little duel here, and that Angel's girlfriend accidentally shoots him by mistake, and he says that Warren's gone, and it just shows again his difficulty with being Angel and why he was worried in the first place with if she ever saw what he was really like. Now, also remember, Cable is here looking for Adler because we know that Cable knows Adler was the one who created these mutant collars, so it's a threat to mutants, and he wants it taken care of. Now, we go to Scotland on Muir Island, and we meet this Moira that Professor X was talking to. That's his friend. She created the Center for Mutant Research, and that is where Adler is. And she was like, well, Adler's one request was not to be bothered, basically. So she's basically like, I don't know what that guy does. And Professor X is alarmed by this, and he's like, so you don't really know if he can reverse mutations? Now, when Professor X is trying to read through the door and what's going on back there, he gets interference, he says, of other mutants, and he senses, we see visually, Mystique and Apocalypse, and then passes out. But it's kind of frustrating how not smart they make Professor X in this episode, because he takes it as, could Adler be a mutant, he says to Moira, but doesn't look like more into that and quickly either. He didn't take it as like, wait a minute, who are these mutants that seem very dangerous and why are they behind there? It was strange. He kind of brushed it off a bit. But Moira says to him, asking if Adler's a mutant, maybe that's why he's after a cure, she says. And this gives a good line from Professor X where he's like, don't say cure, Moira. Being a mutant isn't a disease. It's something you're born with, as normal as being Homo sapiens. And she says not all mutants would agree with you. But this is really good. This is X-Men at its best when it talks about being a mutant, what it means to be a mutant, and acceptance. And it speaks to just a lot of things over time in our society of people who are different not being accepted and looking like something's wrong with them. So I really always love this kind of story in the X-Men lore. So Professor X knows now it is time he must tell the X-Men about Adler's discovery of being able to cure mutants. And we see Wolverine is just hot back at the mansion, just giving orders, and then he gets chippy with Gambit, and it really shows that Professor X contacted him at the best time because it looked like all hell was going to break loose. So Wolverine's reaction to this news from Professor X is, so you mean someone's trying to steal our powers, which is actually correct. And Cyclops says some mutants might welcome the chance to be normal, and this is when Rogue's face clearly drops. And I love, though, Wolverine in the background is like, yeah, who? And you see, it's a nice touch here, even in an animated show, they sneak great visuals where they put an insert shot of Jean and Cyclops holding hands, and this would trigger Rogue even more to her trauma, to her feeling of not wanting to be a mutant because she can't touch people. She can't have that normalcy. But you'll see Jean is observant of this, and she'll say to Cyclops, she's worried about Rogue, senses her pain when they touch, kiss. So there you go. But I love when Storm's like, you taught us to value our powers, not for their own sake, but what they can do for others. And Wolverine's reaction is, you tell him, Storm, no deserters in this crowd. I thought that was so great. Like, Wolverine's reactions in the show are priceless. And then we see that Gambit sees Rogue is going to Scotland, and he's like, well, I know vacay in Paris. And he goes, let's have a kiss before you go, huh? So Gambit's about to get Me Too'd real quick, but one of Gambit's best line deliveries comes when Rogue says to him, "You know what happens when I touch somebody? You want to end up in the hospital?" And Gambit goes, "Maybe it's worth it." No? I thought that was so good. And I just loved something about it was just short shot, but just the emotions of Rogue sitting on a plane wing thinking about being a mutant and not wanting that anymore was just priceless. I thought it was so cool and how special even animated shows can be. And it's interesting during this scene though, when a human notices her on the plane wing, there's like a wind instrument version of the theme song that plays really fast. So I also love when they do variations of the theme song. So we now see Avalanche and Pyro on Muir Island, and they're in the pub throwing darts, and they're broke, and they're also there because Pyro was told by Mystique to come there and meet her. And now Pyro takes his shot at being creepy to Rogue, and he's like in the mood for a hot date. And she goes in a bullseye and literally throws him bullseye into the dartboard, which was so funny. And what I just love about things you can do in animation and really like lean into people's powers is when Rogue goes straight to Adler herself and he's like, "Visitors are verboten," and she's like, "I didn't fly across the whole dang ocean to take no for an answer," and just slams the door down. But we see Rogue wants to be normal, and she says she doesn't want to live her whole life without knowing what it's like to touch another human being. So this is stuff too, like when adults watch the show, you can really like appreciate how good this writing is and how good this character work is. But when she leaves, we see Mystique reveals herself as the professor, and we get our first look at Apocalypse. And he says, "You will use the machine and make her my slave." So we now see what the real intentions are here, that it doesn't actually cure mutants. It's there for Apocalypse to make these mutants his slave, and that Mystique is working for him. And I love how Mystique looks in general in the animated series. It's my favorite look I've seen of her. I love the skulls on her head and around her waist. So much better than the movie versions. I hope the MCU gets that right whenever they make a real life version of Mystique. And then we see the Rogue flashback too, where she kisses this boy and her powers cause him to collapse, and why this would be in her head, that trauma of not feeling normal, not experience something like that people should feel joy in that type of moment. Now, Cable shows up to Pyro, and I love that Cable, in all his entrances, gets his own music. It's great. And Cable's like, "I'm looking for Adler." And Pyro goes, "Well, of course you are, darling. He's such a popular fellow." And then Cable blasts him and goes, "Don't call me darling." So good. Now, what's interesting is that Pyro plots with Avalanche to kidnap this Adler because they know everyone wants him. They're broke. They want to find a way to make money. They need work. And they don't realize it's Mystique they're actually kidnapping. And what's funny is when they actually kidnap Adler, they actually save Rogue in the process because the machine was about to start working on Rogue and they destroyed it. So Mystique reveals herself to Pyro and Avalanche, and she asks Pyro to come there because she's basically looking out for a friend, get him a job, thinks he could be of use to Apocalypse. And we learn that Adler was killed by Apocalypse. And the great thing is when she's explaining all this exposition, Pyro responds, "Personally, I find this frightfully confusing." And then Rogue shows up, and then Avalanche says, "It gets worse." That's so good. I didn't even catch that line until the second watch. Now, what was crazy was when Cable had Adler at the cliff, and Cable gets such a badass moment when he pulls the pin off the plasma gray with his mouth, throws it at Rogue. Very cool. But Mystique quickly reveals herself to Cable, and the problem is that when the X-Men shows up, Cyclops shoots Cable off the cliff, so they still don't realize that Adler is Mystique. Now, Rogue will then save Jean from falling off the cliff and dying, and she gets to see Cyclops and Jean embrace because of this, and she cries a bit. But then we see the next scene, she comes around and accepts her powers, so I'm conflicted about this. Maybe you can take it as she saw that her powers are what saved Jean at the end of the day, and that's a good thing, and at least she can give them joy in embracing each other, Cyclops and Jean, and give that joy to others, even though she may not be able to do that herself. But if it's that or it isn't that, it doesn't matter. It still felt kind of rushed how quickly she flips to being accepting of her powers. At the end of the day, I just feel like we needed another scene showing her turn and her thought process about it. It just felt like in such a good episode that was the one hiccup I had, is how quickly she flipped. And if it's just because of that moment with Jean and Cyclops, it still could have been something stronger and even more clear, to be honest, because again, she's crying in that moment, but it could be interpreted different ways. So that's the one thing that kind of bothered me about her storyline this episode, but still very strong. And now we see Angel shows up to Adler thinking it's really Adler, wants to be changed, and it perfectly sets up the next target for Mystique and Apocalypse. And Apocalypse says he knows more of this world than you ever dreamed, why I must destroy it. So it's an exciting cliffhanger with a new big bad here we're seeing in Apocalypse. So I'm going to give this episode an 8.8. Another really good one. Really strong story with Rogue in it. We learn more about her character and getting her thought process and the difficulty of her being a mutant. And we get some great appearances here with Mystique and Apocalypse. And we get to see Pyro and Avalanche, and Cable still gets some screen time, which is always good. And we got to see Angel. So there's a lot going on here that works. Doesn't feel too crowded at the same time. It's a good pace to it. And really, it's fun seeing Mystique in any episodes because Mystique just changing forms. It adds so much mystery, like who's who. And you can kind of see her fool a lot of people. So always a fun character to me, one of my favorites. But yeah, let me know what you thought of this episode. I read every comment. I try to respond as many as I can. And as I stress, please subscribe. Use all the help I get right now being a new channel. And I'll see you next time.